Good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and call the meeting of the Governor's EMS and Trauma Advisory Council Education Committee to order. Have a roll call first. Jody Harbert. John Creech. Here. Robert Gonzalez. Here. Jeff Hayes. Here. Robert Nappage. Here. Laura Lefevers. Here. Oscar Salazar. Here. Max Villers. Here. Kelly Weller. Here. Greg LeMay. Here. Full house. We actually did not have any members slated to come off of the committee. All the expirations were next year, and the next three years. However, unfortunately, due to absences, we would like to thank Sandra Crady for her efforts and her work. Sandra put out a lot of work and helping us with accreditation and a lot of other issues. But unfortunately, due to absences and the job change, she was no longer able to continue. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Gary Bonewall, who will be the new member of the committee. Gary, tell us something about you. And use the microphone, please, today, because it's being taped, and I know the acoustics. I'm hearing an echo back here. Are you all hearing it out there, too? Okay.
Gary Bonewall, I'm with Houston Community College, been in EMS since 1981.
A little bit louder.
And full-time educator with Houston Community College. Have been there for over 10 years and been a paramedic since... You cannot? Okay.
You almost have to eat it.
Okay. Gary Bonewall, Houston Community College, EMS program. Been in EMS since 1981 and paramedic from 85. Been on the streets for close to 20 years and been in education now for full-time for about 13, 14 years.
Well, good deal. Welcome. Welcome, Gary. Since we last met, there are people in your lives and things that happen to you that shape who you are as a person, who we are as a council, and someone who has given us a lot. I probably know that each of you all know that we lost Al Garcia since the last time we met. Some of us in this room made the trip to Wichita Falls for Al's funeral. And I will tell you that his daughter probably took the entire room out when she came up and brought his hat. And that signature black hat that we all see, when you saw that, you saw Al. Al served as a member of this education committee diligently for quite some time. There are some people that you don't replace. There are some people that you might have to put someone in that spot, but there's no way we can replace Al and his contribution to EMS, to the fire service, to this committee, to educators, to those at Vernon, as well as at Wichita Falls. So I'm going to ask each of you all to join me in a moment of silence as we remember Al Garcia. Thank you. I was asked today if we could beat Air Medical's record of 27 minutes in a meeting. I don't think we'll be able to beat that one today. We've got a couple of things on there, and I think it's important that we kind of work through some of these. If you all keep in mind, and I'm going to move a couple of these things around as chair, as we start to discuss some of them, simply because we've kind of discussed them, brought them back for public comment only, and then several new items that we have that we will move forward with. Before I do that, let me thank each and every one of you all too for your support throughout the last six years. I think I've learned a lot. I've learned to listen to each and every one of you. I've learned that the value is in what the people say, not who the person is. That everybody here has contributed to education, both here, whether you're at a college or not at a college, whether you're at a private or you're public or government, it doesn't make any difference. And I thank you all for your support immensely. When the governor's office said, "Hi, you have 6 more years," I said, I guess I'm not being pardoned or paroled, so we're going to be with you hopefully for another 5 to 6 years, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you through good times, through difficult times. But the one thing that I do want to say is thank each and every one of you, because you've made me a better person. So we're going to move into item 1, which is discussion process for matching EMS titles and course to national education standards for recommendation for EMR, EMT, advanced, and medic. I know that we had talked about that, and I think the only reason it came back was for clarification, and that is that this is going to have to be on a legislative change. This recommendation from this body, we can't change it. We can send it to GTAC and ask GTAC to accept these nationally standard changes. There was some there was some discussion about whether we should look at calling everybody medic and making those changes. I think when we looked at it, this was just back on committee. Was it your intent that we move this forward to GTAC with the national standard names? Is that correct? Okay. Do we need a motion?
I move we move forward to GTAC with that recommendation.
Okay. So motion by Mr. Hayes, second by Mr. Creech. Any public comment? This one was really just kind of we're just moving it along. Okay. With no public comment, all those in favor of moving this forward to GTAC for the vote, probably probably be February, I guess. All those in favor, sign of aye. Aye. All those opposed, sign of no. Okay. We will move that forward to GTAC. Item 2 is discuss situation which permits EMS applicants to sit for National Registry of EMT assessment exam to meet initial Department of State Health Services certification, bypassing the National Registry certification requirement. I know this was not one of mine. Who owned this one?
Jody, I think that was me.
Okay.
And this item came up to our attention at the July work session, that there were some candidates who were not eligible for National Registry certification due to background checks, yet would still pass the Texas background and were eligible to sit for, were approved to sit for assessment rather than the certification exam.
Committee, Lori, what's your pleasure? Is this something you want us to take a look at in work group, or?
I think more than anything else, I think we just need to get a verification if that's a process that's happening before we take any action. So we might, at the January work session, develop a specific request to see if this is in fact a process that's happening, and get some rationale. This was a comment that came from the audience, not a committee member.
Okay. So we need to take a look at this application process and check and make sure that no one's falling through the loopholes. And I guess we can do this in our January meeting. Is that correct? Okay. I don't think we can do anything with that today. Any public comment on item 2?
The deadly sins of EMS rule, is that a legislative rule or is that a DSHS rule?
If I'm not mistaken, that's a legislative rule. Derek, I'm looking at number 2. The 8 things that will keep you out of EMS, is that DSHS rule or is that legislative rule? I thought it was legislative.
It is statute. Currently, the only person that's taken National Registry Assessment exam are those candidates that that's seeking reciprocity. They have a certification from another state, but they don't have the National Registry. They have to take the assessment exam. Currently, those are the only people that's been allowed, because when we changed the statute, it pretty much lined up with National Registry, so it hadn't happened since we really changed statute.
Did that answer everyone's question?
Yes, that answered my question, so.
Okay.
I think we can safely move that completely off the agenda.
Okay. Fair enough. Any comment on number 2? None? Item 3, discuss endotracheal tube insertion for EMT intermediate and going into AEMT. I think if you've looked at the curriculum lately, you know that we are moving away from the term intermediate and moving toward the term advanced. In that, there are some curriculum discussion, and I believe one was, we as a state or a group want to make sure that endotracheal tube intubation was part of the AEMT process, and I think that's where we had left off the last time committee.
I think part of the discussion was making sure. I think part of the discussion was just to make sure we set which EMTI curriculum standard would be taught in the state. And the more recent one, does that not include intubation?
I'm confused. The rule we passed will require you to teach AEMT. Statute require you to teach intubation and IV initiation for the intermediate. So even though we adopted the standards for AEMT, you still must teach intubation at that level. The levels will stay the same, and you still will be an intermediate in Texas. But as the new rule would tell you, that in order to become an intermediate in Texas, you must take the National Register AEMT exam. It also tells you that statutes say we have to teach, IV initiation and intubation. So you'll still have to teach those and check these kids off.
Okay, so regardless of what happens, endotracheal tube, the instruction of endotracheal tube insertion will be in the curriculum regardless.
Unless statute change.
Right, okay. Okay. Any public comment on number 3?
I'm sorry?
Come on up front. We want our viewers at home to make sure they hear it and tell us who you are.
Arnie Spears with Champion EMS. If they do not take the exam, do they just become a basic?
If they don't take what exam?
You said they have to take an exam to fall over into the AEMT, which is
I
what
said
they're
that you have to teach the AEMT curriculum, national curriculum. They have to take the National Register AEMT exam in order to become an intermediate in the state of Texas.
But if they're already an intermediate,
Then they're already intermediate in Texas.
okay.
That doesn't change.
Any other questions or comments on item 3? Okay. I don't think we have any action to take on that one. Item 4, discuss setting a statewide standard for equivalency and transfer program processes. I think as we move forward with EMS education, we're going to have to at some point look at those people where personnel went to school when you're attempting to get into a college level program and trying to find out what is equivalent and what's not. I know that some programs will, I know that some programs won't. Mr. McDonald, tell us about Tarrant County, would you?
Big square things that
Yeah, yeah.
sorry, the viewers at home can't hear this.
Come on up.
Okay, what do you want?
I think that we had been looking at equivalency and transfer process. Want to get some input from schools, from everybody out here. What is your policy? We need to see if we can find a good line here to work with everybody.
We're looking at how someone who went to a non-college based paramedic program can come to me and get college hours.
Correct.
All right. For my college, that can't happen. In 2000, when we changed curriculums and we tripled the number of hours within our program, my boss got very upset when someone came from another program that he had left our program to go to that program to become a paramedic in 6 months when ours was 20 months. Our dean's administration canceled the program altogether, and it has never come back. So we don't have a way to do that whatsoever. I know there are places that have credit by exams, credit by experience. I think all those things need to be looked at. I can tell you that when I go back to my deans and I say we need to reinstitute this, their answer is if they want college credit, they should have gone to a college. So that's where we're at.
Okay?
Is that good enough?
That's it.
Thank you very much, viewers at home.
Mr. Fritz, what's the temperature of the pulse at Temple?
Our college, the curriculum committee has approved credit by exam processes to where which they. So Temple College, our curriculum committee approved a process by which we can offer credit by exam to those folks that have taken courses elsewhere. So for example, in the military, if they come to us, they can document a certain amount of training in the military, then that qualifies them to take a credit by exam process by which they meet the same psychomotor, or basically the affective, behavioral, and cognitive evaluations that our students go through. So if they pass all of those components, then the college will then issue them credit.
Is there a fee for that?
There's a $50 per credit hour, I believe is what
Okay.
the college, but that's that's basically across the board for all programs, and it kind of meets what the, I can't think the other credit by exams, or English and
CLEP and
CLEP,
all those?
thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
CLEP, yes.
I have a question before you go. Jeff, I have a question for you before you go.
Louder, closer.
Before you go, that is only available to people transferring in that are already certified as a paramedic, or
Yes,
do you do it for
So-
intermediates as well?
yes. So yes, so they took, in which I can speak to, since almost, well, a little over 20 years ago. So if they became a paramedic in Temple over 20 years ago when it was at Scott and White Hospital, those folks can now come back and go, I've been a paramedic for 20 years, I want to earn an associate's degree, I don't want to go through all the classes again. They basically have been demonstrating that they have the knowledge, they just need a way to transition that knowledge into college credit, and we basically just say, show us that you're competent. So you sit for the exam, you don't actually go through the courses.
Thank you. Mr. Shiplett, can you tell us what happens at Collin? I'm just looking out for, and if I miss a coordinator, I'm actually going to go one by one if I see you here. So I see Scott, I see you back there, Dr. George and Steve next, and just trying to, so we get a pretty good idea.
So if you're a coordinator, line
Mr.
up.
Chairman, restate your question for me again.
In looking at statewide, we are trying to find a statewide standard for equivalency and transfer programs. So if a student came to you who'd been a EMT or a paramedic for X number of years, and they say, hi, I want to get my associate, what's the process, or could they get credit by examination, credit by experience? Would they get credit for their EMT or paramedic if they had not taken it at a college?
At this time, we do not have a process to make that happen. We will eventually have credit by exam, but we currently do not have that at this time. And then students transferring from someone else's paramedic program into ours, right now we don't offer that. We may do that at a later date, and that will depend upon actually where they came from. It's pretty seamless if they came from another community college, but from a paramedic program that's not from a college level, I don't see that happening.
Okay. Thanks, sir. Scott?
Scott Walker, Trinity Valley Community College. We do tests or give them credit by examination. If they've taken basic at another place that wasn't college accredited, then we let them come in and take the basic exam and then come on into the courses. If they have already worked their way all the way through to paramedic, then we also do credit by exam. It's $150. They get 32 college credit hours at that, but to actually get credit for it in the long run, they have to match those hours in the core subjects, English, history, government, and all those. So they don't get actually awarded the hours themselves until they complete the rest of the associate degree plan that we have in place for them.
So $150 for 32 hours, but they don't get the credit till they've completed it.
Completed the rest of the core subjects that go along with that.
Okay. Thank you. If I'm missing a coordinator, I don't have my glasses on back. I see Steve and Dr. George at McLennan. Would you share? And if I'm missing a coordinator in the room, just line up at the mic. Yeah, Hill. We're just trying to get an idea here, publicly.
Hi, I'm Donna. This is Steve. We're MCC. And right now, that process is under review. But at the present time, if an EMT comes to us and wants to enter our advanced program, then they actually, if they have a current state certification, we look at where they got their EMT training, but we give them credit for the hours that they took. What it shows up on their transcript is not an actual number of credit hours, but the letter CR. So it doesn't actually add to their grade point average. And we don't charge for that. We do test their skills before they can enter the program. And currently we're not charging for that either. So MCC, I guess, is the deal. But we are reviewing the process for folks that come in above the EMT level and want to enter paramedic program. So we don't really have anything in place there, but at the EMT level we do.
Okay. Question for Dr. George? Anybody? Okay. Hill?
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Deidre Blankenship with Hill College. We do allow them to come in, but our associate degree program is 62 or 64 credit hours. We are only allowed to transfer in credit by certification 24 credit hours, and it's $25 per class for a posting fee to their transcript. And then the rest of it, they have to either come in and take those paramedic classes over again, or I can do a flex entry type thing, an independent study with them to finish out the hours that are needed for the remaining courses outside of that 24 hours. So it ends up being 7 or 8 more classes, I think.
Okay. Any other college, non-college program coordinators out there? Like I said, I'm just kind of peeping through. I know I've got Dr. Villers here and everybody here, but publicly, just as I think we look at this, it sounds like we've got variances all over. Hey, Jane.
Hello. Jane Densmore, PERCOM, Kilgore College Consortium. Sorry, my voice is almost gone. Anyway, basically, I just wanted to point out to remember, too, how the sponsor programs work for those who are consortiums. Because, for instance, with the Kilgore College is our consortium sponsor. And so what they do with our students is that once they've finished paramedic and they achieve certification, they can then apply into the degree program at Kilgore. And as long as they're in the degree program and they do so many hours in the degree program, they give them across the board credit for the hours in the certification that they completed through our program. So that's just another kind of viewpoint of what you're asking, and I don't know if that's what you were after.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Eddie Walker with Life EMS Academy in El Paso. With our consortium, our paramedic students get 40 hours of credit toward an associate in emergency services with Baker College. The local community college allows, I think it is 16 or 17 hours, and that's basically up to the intermediate level, and then from like cardiology or medical emergencies on through, they're required to complete those courses at the college.
How many hours?
16 or 17 through
16, okay.
EPCC.
Okay, thank you. Any other schools, any other programs? Public, private, doesn't matter. Let's go around the table here. John?
We do credit by exam. We charge $25 a credit hour, up to, I think, 24 hours. Any hours above that will have to be taken through our college in order to get those hours accounted.
Dr. Villers?
UT does have credit by exam, but it's like a $60 application, the common application. And then it's only available for graduates from UT who did not receive credit or for those programs with which we have an affiliation with.
Okay.
At Grayson College, we do credit by award, by exam, credit award by exam. There's no fee for EMT basic training only, which is 9 credit hours at Grayson.
Okay, 9 hours. Thank you.
At South Texas College, we offer 15 hours only at $150 for each credit hour. And that's all we're going to take is 15 hours. So it should cover at least the basic level. Everything else, they have to actually take the courses.
At Blinn, we will give you credit for up to 15 hours, but you have to sign up and take 12 hours, and you have to pass those 12 hours before you'll be given credit for those courses that you've already taken.
Lone Star College System has a prior learning assessment plan where the students can take exams for each of the different component courses. I believe it runs $25 per exam. There's 3 or 4 of the courses at the end that they actually have to sit and take. They're all online courses.
So I think we've heard several different. We've got lots of credit by exam. We have consortiums with other groups. We've got reviews from certain schools. Some charge, some don't. We've got minimums. We've got maximums. So, committee, is this something we want to table and take to January now that we have a little information and kind of looking if we're going to try to look at a statewide setting for equivalency? And this would just be our recommendation only, nothing that dishes would have to do, but we can give them the information that we have. Is that workable? Okay. We'll add this to the January meeting. Thank you to each of you who contributed today, because that was, with everyone in the room, it kind of gave us an idea of what was going on. Any public comment on item 4? Item 5, discuss the requirement of medical director and continuing education. Dudley and I talked yesterday, and this had been on the agenda for a while. And I think it was just, as we examine the rules and we start to go through 157, we start to look, that found that a medical director was not required for someone to have a CE program. For some people, that was a discussionable item. For others, it wasn't. I think that it's probably something that we're going to have to look at a little bit closer to look at the CE rules. But I wanted to get committee and public comment before we went to our work group. As you guys know, with an hour and a half here, we have time to do exactly what we're doing and report back to you on what we find in our work groups. But before we go there, we won't take action there. We'll come back and take action here after more public comment. But currently, you can have a CE program, be given a CE number, and be able to provide continuing ed without a medical director. I think there's some very good CE programs that are out there that don't necessarily have medical direction behind them. I think there's some out there that would benefit from. So it's kind of 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. But we're going to have to take a look at the requirement. Do we think we need a medical director to sign off on continuing education, which I think then brings to mind, do you have to be a coordinator to deliver CE if you're going to have a medical director? So, committee discussion?
Jody? And one of the components of becoming a provider is the QI process with the medical director. And if your medical director is keeping up with your service, a good part of that should be the education there. And they should set the standards on what type of education in your service you're doing. So even if you're doing an in-house CE or you're going online, when it comes time for you to recertify or anytime during the process, your medical director should say, this is what I want to see in education.
Any other comment?
Jody, in thinking about this just a little bit myself, I think having the medical director involved in an ongoing CE program is something to be considered, especially given the connection with the medical director for science discussions and those types of questions. A single class approval, maybe not, but with ongoing CE where you might need medical insight for those ongoing programs.
Any other discussion from the committee? Start over. That is correct that you can have a CE program, you can offer CE without having a medical director sign off.
That's correct.
Okay. I want to make sure that we did have that correct. So, and that would be at the basic and the advanced level?
Any level.
Any level. So we
no
could
level.
basically have CE presented from anyone without medical director supervision, so basically anyone could go do that. Okay?
Let me ask something.
Sure.
How many CE programs do we have out there without a medical director?
Because it's not a requirement and I don't capture them, I'm assuming none of them do. I don't know. We don't require it. It's not a requirement. So, but I know, like, for example, UT Southwestern have a CE program and a program. They have a medical director, so I know they have a medical director, but it's not a requirement for a CE program that stands alone to have one.
So we don't know the numbers right now and
No,
how
it's
this
not-
may impact.
We don't capture that because it's not a requirement for a program to have.
Is there a way for us to find out what those numbers are so we can find out how this is going to impact training?
You have to
CE?
look at the requirement. The requirements say they don't have to have one. That's the requirement. Now, some of them may have a medical director affiliated with their program, but not because it's required for continuing education.
So currently, if I understand, that's data that we can't track because it's not required, so we don't have
Well,
the
it's not
data to be tracked.
It's not data we can't track, but I'm just saying you look at the requirement by rule, it's not required. So even if they have one, it's not a requirement, so you don't capture it. But yeah, I know UT, for example, have one. I know UT San Antonio have one. I know these programs have medical direction. Now, how involved the medical director is in the CE program, I can't answer that because it's not a requirement by the state.
So if a provider was offering CE, would there be a connection with that CE and the provider medical director? If you were not an education entity, but you're a provider, would that medical director
You'll
then
have
be?
to ask those people you just asked if their medical director is involved in their CE program. I don't know.
Okay. Well, no. How many of you all have, by a show of hands, how many of you all have ongoing CE programs at the provider level? Not the college level, but the provider level. Out of those, keep your hands up, please. Out of those that have those, how many of those have physician involvement? Okay, thank you. Almost all.
So physician. So making the recommendation for physician involvement would not be that onerous of a situation because you already all have it. It just seems a logical thing to do to me. My education program has to have a medical director. How is continuing education any less important than initial education?
Any public comment? Yes, sir. Good, something finally people want to, yeah, great. Okay.
It's me, I stirred him up. Start him up.
Good afternoon. My name is Curtis McDonald, and I'm a paramedic here in Texas that's currently not affiliated with a provider. So as an informed consumer, I would appreciate knowing if the CE I'm taking from a CE provider was approved by a medical director as opposed to.
Okay. Thank you, Curtis. Mr. Shiplett?
James Shiplett, Collin College, McKinney, Texas. I agree with what Kelly Willer said, but you have to keep in mind that the state has two different CE processes. One's the ongoing, the other is a standalone. I can see a hospital doing a standalone CE and not have an EMS medical director, and a service needing needing CE that their medical director would be involved with, and that's two different things. So for the ongoing, I support the medical director. For the standalone, maybe not so much.
Thank you.
Good point, James. Thank you.
Hi, Karen.
I'm Karen Yates. I guess the only comment I have, I completely support the need for medical direction. The challenge that I would have as an independent provider of continuing education is I work under several medical directors. So then I would be in the challenge of which medical director do you choose to be over your continuing education program. And I would probably choose none of them because then you don't get into that conflict with various medical opinions. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I think for some of us that are independents, it would be a challenge. However, I completely agree with the need for the medical oversight.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. John, good afternoon.
John Purrier. I do have my own independent continuing education number and program, and I fully support having medical director involvement. Right now I don't have to because it's not a requirement. It's not that we don't, I've got a lot of friends who are medical directors, and I'm always throwing, making sure that I'm teaching the proper content. That's just an integrity thing to me. So as far, if it's a requirement, I fully support the requirement. It just needs to be a requirement. If it's not, then I'm not going to, unfortunately. But I do support it. I do support it.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Committee, what's your pleasure? We table this and move on? Do we, tell me what you want now.
Jody, you have to ask yourself, why do we have the CE programs, the ongoing CE programs and whatsoever? What's the overall reason why we have this? Why do students or personnel, EMS personnel, want to take CEs? It's to recertify, right? I don't think that if there's, I don't know the numbers, I'll make a number up. 45% might want to take it just so they can keep up with newer information, but overall, I think there's a larger number wanting to recertify, and if it's for recertification, I believe they should have medical director involvement.
Oscar?
Presently, we actually get CEs from hospitals. They offer CEs to our pre-hospital providers. Are they going to be required to have a medical director in order for those CEs to count towards our certification, recertification?
I think the answer would be yes, if whatever the committee votes on, whatever GTAC approves and goes to dishes. Is that your recommendation that?
Well, I want to make sure that those options still exist and that we don't lose that portion of the CEs because we're going to be going into that direction where they're going to have to have a medical director.
Okay. Yes, sir. Hey.
Justin Voigt with the EMS committee. The one thing I would ask before you make a decision is to look at, is there a reason or was there a catalyst event that is going to cause you to make this decision? Are we going to increase the integrity of the CE program by adding the medical director? We're trying to create another restriction or trying to create another barrier. If we have a system that's currently working, and we haven't had any complaints with it, and we're achieving the goal or the objective set by the state, do we need to change it? Now, I'm all for if we have something that's causing this catalyst and we need to get a physician or a medical director involved with this process, by all means. But if we haven't had an event or we're going to create another barrier to get education out, that's something that we need to think about before we act.
Thank you, Justin.
Kay Vogel from the South Texas Health System in the Rio Grande Valley. Speaking from hospital standpoint, we are basically obligated through our designation certification requirements and from stroke certification and chest pain certification to work with the EMS, to do training for the EMS. We do not have medical directors from the EMS part of our training programs. It's a hospital-based program. So if you were to put those requirements on that, it may affect hospitals in providing those types of services for you.
Thank you. Run, Karen, run.
Jody knows I always have something else to say. Something that somebody over here brought up, and I think the discussion with hospitals brings up a point, that there are more and more EMS providers that only work in the hospital. They do not work for a pre-hospital provider. So if they were receiving all of their continuing education through reciprocity through nursing, how would that impact this if that was made a rule? I don't know. Does it? Does it not? Because anything that's approved for nursing automatically would give you EMS continuing education. So just to throw that out as a reminder as well, that may be sort of one of those other glitches that would have to be dealt with.
Committee, let me reiterate what Karen just said, and do keep that in mind, that Department of State Health Services accepts other CE from other disciplines, and if it's approved by the Board of Nursing, it's automatically approved by Department of State Health Services. If it's approved for MCE, for medical continuing education from physicians, DSHS automatically approves that for EMS. So, Jeff?
Jody, I have to ask the question, and I have to agree with Justin. It seems to be a solution looking for a problem, in the sense, I don't know, what I guess what I'm asking is an opportunity to look at it a little bit longer and shoot all the traps before we make a decision that really we don't know that there is a problem. I mean, I need to be more educated on this before I could be expected to vote or even take a stance on it. Because how did this come to us, I guess, is a question I have to ask too.
Came from public.
Okay.
Public comment. Absolutely.
All right. I would respectfully request that we review this a little longer before we make a move on this.
Come on up. Don't sit down.
You know, after listening to all of this, I'm in agreement with you, sir. I think that we need to look and see, do we really have a problem? We all know there are different types of medical directors, different types of instructors, different types of everything. And I think unless we clearly have a problem, that we don't need to make more of these people who, quote, are medical directors, but in reality they're really not. Unless you have a definite complaint against somebody, you know, we can investigate that particular program. I think that we're better off not doing this time without further recommendations or arguments for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more thing, sorry. I agree with her as well. As far as the content of continuing education, there is a national curriculum, obviously, that a person to recertify has to have so many hours broken down into certain criteria. I do believe that it being QI-based, I understand, and talking about being medical director driven, what's going to work for my medical practice. But it's not the case, because that may not follow the national curriculum. So as a CE program, there's a certain number of hours in the items, you know, that I have to teach and provide for that person. If I do get a medical director, if that's what's required, okay. But I'm going to have a physician that I go to and say, here's my 2-year report that I'm giving DSHS of my schedule that I'm going to teach, and I'm going to develop this content. I now give him or her that content and say, do you approve, yes or no? And if I get the rubber stamp, then it's approved and I can teach that class. So we also know how the rubber stamp works on other things as well. So I don't know if it will make it better, keep it the same, or even make it worse. Either way, that's just continuing education. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jody,
Yeah.
when this did come up in public content, I believe the spirit of it was the fact that if I want to be a coordinator and have a program, these are the hoops that I have to jump through to have a program. If I want to have a CE program, the only hoop that I really have to jump through is to fill out an application to DSHS and become a CE program. So there's no hard set standards on the education process in a CE program versus an education program. And I think that was the spirit of the discussion when it was brought up.
Committee?
Public waiting to speak.
I'm sorry. Hey.
Mike Costantino, City Assured CMS, and I want to echo the spirit of why it was brought up, because that is the case. Coordinators have to sit through essentially a 3-day course plus take a test, plus fill out echoes and echoes of paperwork to have an initial program. And I think there should be some onus put on that for the CE instructors, just so myself as a paramedic can't go become a CE instructor and develop a program. And there has to be some, I guess, backing and support behind that from medical direction and have that buy-in for specific programs. I think we're comparing apples and oranges when we're talking about hospital-based CE versus EMS systems or paramedic-based CE, because hospital-based CE, there's a lot of backing, there's national backing behind that. Not just me as a paramedic want to develop a class and go out and teach it to the masses. And I think that's where my stance is on it and why I stand behind that.
Thank you.
Jody. Gary. Do we actually know if there are any complaints to the state about CE programs now, or is that something that y'all track as far as any complaints from CE providers?
We are a conduit for education, and when people bring things so far, until GTAC changes the format, when people bring things, we put them on the agenda to do just this, to find out what's going on, to find out what's real and what's happening. So, Kelly, you were about to?
I was going to recommend that we table this until January, where we can all as a committee go do some research, look at impacts in our own area, and then bring it back to discuss in January.
Is that a motion?
That was a motion.
Second.
Motion and second. Discussion from public? Hearing none. All those in favor, sign of aye. Aye. All opposed, no. All right, we will bring item 5 back to our January work group meeting to discuss the requirement of medical director for continuing education programs. Keep in mind the things that were said here today, the spirit versus actual versus hospital versus private versus community, and we'll take a look at that. I'm going to go to item 8 because I think I'm just looking at some time frames here. We've got plenty. Dr. Jarvis, are you here? Did I see you earlier? Okay, hiding. Great. Medical Director Committee met yesterday, and there's been some discussion recently about item 8, which is followed Medical Directors Committee discussion of oversight for students during clinical and field experiences. We've had some things brought to EMS and education's attention, as well as medical directors, about the continuation of medical director duties once there's a transfer of that patient from one provider to another, whether it be from ground to air and air back to the hospital or other issues. Well, this one is more of an education issue, because when that student is in clinical, what happens to that student when that student is trained by a medical director in a program, and then that particular program has a contract with a provider? That student then goes to the provider for training. Is that student then under the provider's medical direction? in doing a little quick research, we found that some medical directors didn't even know they had students in their program, that they didn't realize that students were being precepted there. And where does this authority go, and when does it stop, and when does it start? And I know the medical directors had a meeting on it yesterday and would love to hear what happened. Dr. Jarvis, would you share with us? Speak really, get really close. Is it?
You can come use mine.
Kind of feel like Cher. So what I can do, I don't want to speak for the committee, but I'll be happy to try to summarize the position statement that I wrote, as well as the conversation. And by the way, my name is Jeff Jarvis. How's that? My name is Jeff Jarvis, and I'm a Scott and White emergency physician and a medical director for Williamson County EMS and Marble Falls EMS. The issue was brought up at our committee at our last meeting, and it was really brought up as a clarification of whose responsibility, who is responsible for the student in which setting. We tossed the word clinical around, so I'd like to see if I could just clarify that. The position statement does not address anything other than field rotations. So we're not talking about hospital rotations at all. Anything in clinics anywhere outside of the back of the ambulance or under the auspices of an EMS system was not included in that position statement. The position statement clarified the current situation, which is that anyone operating in whatever role, either as a provider or as a student, in the back of an ambulance or, again, in whatever environment, with that EMS system are doing so under the clinical authority of the system medical director. So not the program medical director. And a way of thinking about this, because apparently there's some confusion about it. So I've been trying to think about it, and one way of looking at this is when you are giving a drug in the field, a physician somewhere somehow has ordered that drug. When it's in the hospital, it's really crystal clear because someone actually wrote out or typed in an order. So whose order that was is not really in doubt. In the field, it's a little more nebulous because it's not black and white, but it's still pretty clear. It is the physician who signed the, whatever you call them, clinical practice guidelines, standards of care, protocols. It is that system medical director who ordered the epinephrine, the albuterol, the Solu-Medrol, whatever that drug is. It's not the program medical director ordering the drug for that patient. That's what that position statement was designed to clarify. Now, the issue that you bring up, Jody, is a different one that was also covered in the position statement. EMS medical directors are on the hook, if you will. They are liable for all of the care being provided within their system, regardless of who is doing it. We felt like if the medical director is not even aware that there are students working with that system, in other words, someone made it, the system entered into an affiliation agreement without the medical director's knowledge, we didn't think that was a good thing. There were 3 lines to that position statement. The last one says, we don't think that's a good idea, and we think that in the approval process for provider licensing and for education programs, that the medical director of the system needs to have a say, needs to sign off on any affiliation agreements. And that's pretty much the position statement.
For those of you who may not have it, it's not too lengthy. Dr. Jarvis, if you don't mind, I just want to read it. GTAC Medical Director's position statement to Medical Director's responsibility for students operating within an EMS system. That is the correct one, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not about freestanding ERs.
Right. Yeah, not that one. EMS medical directors are given the responsibility and authority for clinical care provided under their license certified by the licensees provided working in their system through Texas Medical Board 197. Additionally, they assume liability for clinical care provided by anyone acting in the capacity within those systems. Many EMS providers have affiliation agreements with training institutions to provide clinical experiences to their students. The Texas Department of State Health Services requires training programs to have an affiliation agreement with any EMS provider with whom their students rotate. This is, however, no requirement that the EMS medical director sign or consent to these affiliation agreements. There is no requirement that the affiliation agreement address the relationship between the student and the EMS medical director. This places EMS Systems Medical Director in a position of assuming responsibility and liability for the clinical actions of students over whom which they have no authority, potentially without knowledge of or consent to the student's presence. EMS training programs have their own medical directors who have responsibility over the clinical content of the program and must attest to the student's achievement of the educational objectives. The training program's medical director does not extend to the clinical care delivered. As a result, there's often confusion regarding the authority for clinical, regarding authority and responsibility for students while engaged in clinical activities in the EMS systems. It can at times be unclear whose medical authority the student is working under. The position is, under this position, GTAC, that item 1, while functioning within an EMS system, all participating providers and students fall under the authority of the EMS system medical director. Item 2, the affiliation agreement between the EMS system and the training program should reflect the authority of the EMS medical director for all care provided. And item 3, DSHS should add a requirement to the program approval regulations that require the EMS system's medical director's approval on any affiliation agreements between EMS systems and training programs. Questions for Dr. Jarvis? Comments for Dr. Jarvis? Comments on adding the affiliation? Testing, testing. Anyone home? No. I think that in talking to Dudley, Dr. Jarvis, Dr. Malone, several other members, it appears, and I'm going to go out on this limb, and someone will tell me it'll crack under me. I'm quite sure it will. Jane, you're probably going to crack it for me. In that this appears that if a signature is added to the clinical affiliation agreement stating that the EMS system medical director or provider medical director approves that clinical affiliation agreement, it pretty much, we're talking about adding a signature to a document and that covers it. Is that pretty much?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Jane?
Oh, I don't get to sit down yet?
Is this working now?
Yes.
Hear me okay? Okay. Well, a couple of issues come to mind, and I think some of them might have been brought up yesterday. I was not able to make the Medical Directors Committee meeting. But several things that come to mind to me. One, and we'll just jump to the agreement line, since that's what you were just discussing first. It sounds simple to just add another signature, but it's really not. I think that any of us who deal with having to get our clinical affiliation and EMS affiliation agreements signed, some of them are, somewhat evergreen, but not really. Other ones we have to sign annually. It becomes quite a hardship at times trying to police them and get them all through. And the more signatures you have to get, the longer it takes, the more you have to police it, and the harder it is to get the agreement signed. That sounds like, oh, well, that's your problem, but it's really not, because I could see a problem with, agreements lying on desks for long periods of time. We all know that sometimes, while operations directors may remain for long periods of time at services, a lot of times EMS medical directors change. Some services have multiple EMS medical directors. So we're going to have to get them all to sign because they're all potentially liable. You see where I'm going with this? It could become very difficult. And now, instead of having man-hours chasing down agreements looking for the operations director to make sure that we get the signatures, we're going to have to spend man-hours also tracking down, well, they're on this medical director's desk, they're on that doctor's desk, He has a problem with it right now. It's going to have to wait, and it's going to be a big problem chasing down these things regularly. The other issue is a lot of them will, at this point, in my opinion, say, well, geez, I don't want to be potentially liable for that. I'm not signing that contract. I don't want them in our facility, which is going to minimize the places that we can send our students when we cannot get the contract signed at all. So those are some concerns that I and others of the coordinators that I've been talking to over the last couple of days have voiced is how would we get these done? And when we have to get some of these signed yearly, it's going to be very, very prohibitive for us to be able to do. The other question I have is, did this, and Dr. Jarvis, maybe you can answer this, did this come up because there was a particular case or suit that happened that involved the proximate cause being extended over to the medical director of a system because a student did something, and when the suit came out that the medical director was also sued? Was that part of this?
So I can tell you how I was tasked with writing the position statement, and I made the mistake I would recommend none of y'all make. I left the room, and when I came back, there was a nice little task on my desk.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So for me, I actually looked at this and said, why? I don't think we need this. I think that I think everybody knows it's the system medical director's responsibility. What I found yesterday is everybody doesn't know that, so perhaps there is a need from a clarification standpoint. Now, as far as the signature goes, that particular part I put in there because Dr. Beeson had raised the issue, where he has programs doing rotations with his facility that he didn't, or his institution, that he wasn't aware of. And he said, you know, I kind of have a problem with that, where the provider can make all of the agreements they want and host all of the students they want, working in the back of their ambulances under Dr. Beeson's license, and he doesn't have anything to say about it. So that's the reason I put that in there. The position statement that I wrote was really intended to clarify the issue, restate the issue, and address the concerns that were brought up at the medical director committee.
And I understand that. However, to me, it seems more that it's an issue between the medical directors and the provider agency. They need to work inside their agencies, in my opinion, on communication in-house. And if the medical directors aren't knowing who these services are, then they need to have that discussion and work out who they want, who they don't ahead of time so that the operations directors can have the freedom to sign or know what they're supposed to sign. That would solve part of that problem without having to have more signatures on the agreement. Plus, if you think about it, let's say you have a service that the medical director leaves. And those actually happen to me. I've seen it seems more common sometimes than operations directors leave. Each time that happens, that contract has to be re-signed by a new medical director. If you have 4 medical directors for that service, 3 medical directors, whatever, the multiples, every time one of them leaves, now you have to go back and police and get this contract signed again. So to me, it seems more of a problem between the operations people and the medical director people on them working out what they want in their systems, and then we as educators, we go in and get our contract signed. If they all don't agree or do agree, then we work that out, or they work that out, and then they sign it or they don't. But chasing multiple signatures I don't see as being something that's going to be a usable system for EMS education programs. The other thing I wanted to say, and the reason I asked about the case was I talked to, and I cannot mention names, some of them spoke to me privately, so you can take this and say, well, she could be throwing this out or not, but I did talk to several attorney/paramedics and a couple of attorney/MDs. And they looked at me with this look like, what are you talking about? And the reason they gave me that look was because they, in their opinions, not only have there not been a case of any of this extending to a medical director, but they said it would be very, very difficult to prove proximate cause. Because as Dr. Jarvis said, the protocols are written from the medical director to the paramedics, et cetera, in the system. The student is being precepted under them. They're not the ones receiving the orders. The orders are to the paramedic who monitors then and basically monitors the duties of the student underneath them. Now, I could see that paramedic taking a lot of liability, but proving proximate cause to the medical director who has the orders in good faith to his paramedic on the truck who then is precepting students is a little far-stepped reach for that to be proven in a court of law as proximate cause. That's what I was told by multiple ones. Now, one of the other parts of that may be relative, and it could have changed. I remember I looked into this several years ago when I was a program director at a college, because we had hospitals that were saying the nurses could not precept our students because they just couldn't do it. They can't precept students. They don't have the authority. But then we found, and you can correct me, nurses in the room if I'm wrong, that there was a rule in the nursing rules that allow nurses to delegate duties to non-licensed personnel who are trained, which means they can precept. Maybe the problem we need to look at is not necessarily where we're going here, but having a more clear rule that allows or clarifies paramedic delegation of duties to students. Because then you would have that path. But to me, this paper, the docs are doing, and I realize what they're doing, but I think they're drawing a big target on their backs. Let's invite the lawyers to come sue us, when before they really would have trouble putting proximate cause. But if that doctor's signature is on that agreement, you can guarantee it if there's a problem. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Jerry?
Hello. Hello. I'm Jerry Dinsmore. I'm with PERCOM. I did attend the medical directors committee meeting yesterday, and I brought up a couple of points there that I want to bring up here. This appeared on the agenda, and it kind of surprised me. I had absolutely no prep time to look into the issues. But the thing that struck me immediately was my liability insurance and whether it would cover a student that is now operating underneath a medical director that is not a member of my organization. And I would ask for some time to actually do some investigation with the major student blanket policies and companies out there that insure our programs to make sure that this is not going to cause a glitch in our insurance and have a student out there uncovered, okay? The other issue going along with what Mrs. Dinsmore said, contracts, generally speaking, are written between two entities, my company and your ambulance company. When you start adding third parties in, like she said, and they leave, is that ambulance company going to come and list every school that they have an affiliation agreement, call me on the phone and say, we just let our medical director go and we've got a new one, we have to redo an agreement? Or are they going to go blindly on, like most of them are, let's be honest, and 3 months later I find out they changed medical directors, which voided my clinical affiliation agreement with them, and I've had students in there for 3 months. I see it as being a major problem when you tie contracts entity to entity. As long as the entities are still in business, the contract's still valid. Okay, when you add individual personnel in here, you're going to run into problems. And that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Jerry. Joe?
Joe Hamilton from San Jacinto College. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. We've been monitoring this process with the medical directors committee through our medical director at the college for some time, and I just want to, applaud the medical directors committee for having presented and developed this statement of, and I hope sincerely that GTAC adopts this and it moves forward. Sitting in the back, I got two ideas in my mind that really, this kind of threw me off. I was not expecting this decision to have been made this weekend. And the first one is, EMS providers are probably, at the result of this, take more active role in the educational process and the educational functions that go on their ambulances. This could be a very positive thing. We could see better selected preceptors, better trained preceptors, and better competencies out in the field. And I think the second process that's going to gain from this is the colleges and educational programs that send students to these training providers, to the EMS providers, will have to provide a more competent and verified student into the clinical setting before they'll be allowed to come out to these programs. And we see this seed rising into a plant in some services in Texas. And I'm very pleased to know that there are services who are very concerned about the competencies of the paramedics that come to their ambulances. And the last, not least, and I think the third that's going to really benefit all of us, is the communication and the collaboration that will now occur between physicians in the EMS provider sector and physicians, medical directors in the EMS educational sector. So thank you again, Medical Directors Committee. I think this is a big step.
Thank you, Joe. Curtis?
I was reaching back to my days precepting on the ambulance. I precepted a lot of students in my day. I had in my standard delegated orders a signed page from my physician medical director that said, as a paramedic in the system, I am allowed to extend delegation to my students up to the level of their training. There was no question then in my standard delegated orders what I could do with a student in my ambulance. I think that's a good coverage that says the medical director knows that there's students in his system because there's an order for it. And maybe that's an easier way for a college or an education entity to be able to say, do you have a policy or a protocol that covers students in your system? If yes, then hey, let's move forward with this agreement. If not, maybe you should address that before we approach you with that sort of agreement.
Thank you. Dr. Beeson? You actually started all this, didn't you?
Jeff Beeson. I'm the dup that Jeff just threw under the bus. I challenge, no offense to other medical directors in the room, to find a more involved medical director than I am in my system, and to find that I have agencies rotating in my system from other states. I put this forth to the Medical Directors Committee more as a form to protect other physicians that are not as involved as I am. Because if I don't know who's rotating in my system, I challenge others to know what's happening in their system also. So I take some offense to the other person that said it's a communication issue between the agencies. I think we have to stop this. Has there been some case or waiting for something bad to happen before we get proactive about preventing something bad that happened? I guarantee you today that if you go to most medical directors who are signing off on programs, who are signing off on EMS protocols, they do not understand that their personal TMLT policy for malpractice does not cover delegation of authority through paramedics. We have to have a separate policy for that, and I challenge you to ask your medical directors how many have that additional policy. So as we sit here and talk about this campaign of disinformation, we really need to stop this reactive response and get proactive about this, and that's why I brought this forward to Jeff. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Dr. Beeson. Any other public? Dr. Malone?
Hello, I'm Dr. Sharon Malone, and I'm here to help. Okay, I had to throw in my 2 cents worth. One of the problems about, can you hear me now?
Better.
Can you hear me now?
Better.
One of the problems is that all of us in this room have a lot of collective knowledge, and we know what we know. We have a lot of medical directors in the state of Texas that we can't find. And that's the real issue. The issue is, much like you guys spoke about a medical director's course before you, at least within a time frame from the time that you become an EMS medical director, there is knowledge that you didn't learn in medical school unless you attended an EMS fellowship afterwards, which are relatively new. So what we need to do is reach out in an education program to find these medical directors that are not in the room, because they're the ones who don't realize that they have students writing out with 15 agencies, and they really cannot know what they don't know. So I believe we're all speaking the same language, and I think the answer is to get the medical directors everywhere educated and involved in what they're signing off to do.
Thank you, Dr. Malone. Any other public comment? I think our direction per the agenda was to follow Medical Directors Committee discussion and oversight for students during field and clinical experience. Dr. Jarvis, Dr. Beeson, is this being moved? Was your recommendation yesterday in the committee to move this to GTAC for a vote tomorrow? Okay. As an action item for recommendation? Okay. There are 9 possible action items on GTAC agenda tomorrow. Item 9 is review and possible approval of GTAC Medical Directors Committee position paper regarding education program medical directors' responsibility for clinical care provided by EMS students during the students' clinical rotation. So I bring this to the committee that if we were going to go somewhere and do something with it, it may be a little late unless GTAC tables it tomorrow. They're scheduled to take a vote.
Jody, I brought this to our committee agenda just to follow. There's no action on our part, just to follow what the medical director, so we would be informed.
Okay. We had our discussion number 8. Number 6, and by the way, thank you all for being as honest and pure as you were on this subject. Obviously, any subject that we tackle, there's always 3 or 4 different sides, and they're all correct, and thank you. Item 6, discuss the negotiation of continuous state regulatory agreements by Department of State Health Services for the purpose of out-of-state clinicals and field experiences. Who does this belong to?
Jody, me again.
Okay.
This was an issue that we talked about at the July meeting. Eddie brought that to us. Eddie Walker in El Paso brought that to us from his organization. And we just wanted to, I think this is something that we can take to the January work meeting to formulate a request for DSHS to assist in that regulatory agreement, not necessarily clinical agreements, but just the regulatory oversight, not even addressing the medical director points, program medical director and out-of-state licenses and that sort of thing, but just the regulatory part of the puzzle.
Okay. Committee, comment? Any public comment? Hey, Eddie.
I am still Eddie Walker. I am still with Life EMS Academy, and I am still in El Paso. I just want to say thanks for finally bringing this out to where it's something that we could talk about, hopefully start to take some action on. Because I have students that not only do some ride-outs in El Paso County, but an agreement in which they have to drive 630 miles to be able to do rotations, turn around and drive 630 miles back. I find that that is ridiculous when I have a service that is 45 miles to the north in Las Cruces that says we will take all of the students that we possibly can. Also, we are moving toward accreditation, and accreditation does say, hey, out-of-state rotations are fine as long as you meet these certain criteria, like a medical director agreement with the director of the service that they are going to be doing those rotations with. So I really ask the committee and the state to take a look at this, to do something about it, to try to fix this problem, not just for El Paso, but for all of those that are in the Panhandle, over by Arkansas and Louisiana. There are a lot of good sites that are just on the other side of the state line in which students can do rotations, both hospital and EMS, and it is much safer for them to drive that 40 or 50 miles rather than 3, 4, 5, 630 miles.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Justin?
Something else to consider when you're thinking about this, and I agree with what he just said. I think it's ridiculous that we're making students travel so far. One thing you might want to realize is that in my area, we actually send the students, because of the clinical rotations, we'll send them to a program in the other state. So they'll go through the program in the other state, they'll become national registry, they'll fill out their paperwork for reciprocity, and they'll be awarded the state license, and they still did the clinical rotations in the other state. So what are we really trying to achieve? That's my concern, is we block them from being in a program in Texas, but they're going to go across the state, and they'll get that program anyway, and they'll still end up with a Texas certification.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Committee, what's your pleasure on item 6? Do we add this to the January meeting?
So moved.
Moved and second that we move this item. I don't think we need to, we'll just go ahead and move it. Item 7, last but not least on our agenda, discuss the quality of online EMS education programs in Texas. I think that's going to be a long process.
It's going to be a very long conversation.
I think that is going to be a process of...
Pack a lunch.
Please understand a couple of things, that when we send these into dishes, legal takes a look at these, and sometimes words are added and things are changed to what I necessarily send. I think the intent here is that regardless of whether you believe in online education or not, it's here and it's here to stay. And it's not going anywhere. And I think there are programs out there that are doing a great job with it. There are others that can use some help. I think there may be some issues that if we need to discuss, I'm almost, committee, tell me, if should we look at this from what Department of State Health Services needs, that they're missing in a gap, or is there some gap somewhere? Or do you all feel as a committee we just need to take this on and look from beginning to end?
Jody, if we take this forward, I think we really need to approach this from an inclusive point of view rather than an exclusive point of view.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just know that you guys know how you all are. You all like stuff on the agenda and off, and I'm just looking at this one. It's going to be here a while. This one will be here for a while, which is absolutely fine. I guess I'm looking from you guys, what is it you all feel we need to do with this item? I mean, we can discuss the quality and we can talk about the quality. Are we looking at guidelines? Are we looking at writing something? I think we can discuss this all day long, but as an educator, what's our goal? To say that we talked about this? Are we looking at proposing requirements? Are we I guess I'm probably looking for clarification myself on exactly what you all want to do.
Could you possibly get us some clarification on the focus on this and bring it back in January? Is that possible?
If we do that, how about we bring it back in February? Because I'm looking at the January meeting, it's pretty full. We can bring this one back in February and say, okay, exactly what is it we need done?
Yeah, because otherwise we're just aimlessly talking about things.
Department of State Health Services, if you guys don't mind between now and then, I'd just love to sit and you all can give us some direction as far as what you all need us to do to get this done. And we'll move from there. So I'm going to take item 7 off the agenda. We'll look at it for February if we need to. Committee, we need to look at a date to meet for a workshop. Keep a couple of things in mind, and there may be a couple of people who weren't here the last time. In order for agendas to be published, we need these agendas out at least 30 to 45 days ahead of time. 35 is minimum. I mean, really minimum. So someone look right quick and tell me when the next When is our February GTAC meeting? I guess that's the next point.
27th, 28th, and the 1st is March when they meet.
Okay. So right at the end of February, so we probably need something, and I'm looking, I know those of us that have programs that start on the 14th, 15th, around there, we've got programs that start, we're probably going to need to be there then. So, Dr. Gonzalez, I see you popping up a calendar here. Many people still off here. I know we don't even come back until here. That's the first week of school.
Okay, you ready to come back the 11th or the 18th, because the other 25th is too late.
25th would give us 30 days.
Yeah, you said 35 minimum.
Yeah. What's your pleasure? Louder so everybody can.
Get it done before February. Yeah. And it has to be done by what, January 18th, Jody, to get 35 days in?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, last day can be the 18th of January.
January 18th is a Friday.
Yes, and the 11th is a Friday also.
How many of you all are still out on the 11th? Because I know some programs are out and some aren't. Okay.
It's actually easier to do this.
So we're talking the 11th or the 18th of January? Pick one.
18th.
18th?
I haven't got anything in January yet.
Oscar?
18th. 18th, good.
Yeah.
EMS committee is going to have the work group on the 18th. Those of us that go back and forth, it's going to have two meetings getting in.
Yeah. Why don't we set the 18th? If we need to change it, we will. But right now, does that work for everybody here?
18th, good.
18th work for everybody here. I hear you. I know. Whenever we do it, there'll be something. Because the week prior to that, most of the schools are still out and people are still gone. So, tentative January 18th, 9A to 3P.
In Austin?
We coming back here, Jeff?
Yes.
Okay. LRC probably?
Hold on that.
Okay. Let me ask, or let me make this statement. As soon as we know, we contact Dishes and they put it up on the website, because I know people ask me all the time, there's a confirmation process that we have to go through to get it done. Before you travel to any meeting, please look at the Dishes website. I know our October meeting, we had to cancel. We had some other issues that just couldn't be helped and ended up canceling. I know one or two of you came over, and I want to apologize for that. But I will ask you to be sure and look. If you need to call one of the committee members, do send me an email and ask, are we still meeting on that date? I know everyone's time is valuable, and we don't want you to have to meet or have to come if we've had to change or reschedule a location. Understand, too, that once the location is picked and it's printed and it goes in the Texas Register, we cannot change the address or location. Okay, so if something changes under that 30 days, it's not like we can go to somewhere else. We have some constraints that we have to deal with. So, committee again, January 18th from 9A to 3P, somewhere here in Austin. That work? Any public comment? You know, if you show up that day, I'm quite sure one of us will buy you a donut. Yes, sir.
Jody, there's one item that we're going to have to add to your agenda.
Okay.
I guess in January or February, probably February meeting.
Okay.
The Trauma Systems Committee is want to put together a work group to assist with the implementation of the trauma registry, and they're looking for one person from each committee. I think they want about 18 seats on this committee. On this work group. So they will be asking for a representative from your committee. So you all would have to vote who that representative is.
When will they want this done by?
It will be on your February agenda for sure.
To pick or to
Select
discuss?
someone.
To select, okay.
Right.
Committee members, if you'll keep in mind between now and September, now and February.
And you
one
should
of
be
you
getting a
all-
letter from Jory Klein. You will
Okay.
get that letter, so you can send it to people. But just know that we will put that on your agenda for February.
Okay. We'll be asking one of you to serve on the Trauma Systems Committee. So just keep that in mind, how your schedule works. Let me recap one. Item 1 is gone. Item 2 is gone. Item 3, discuss endotracheal intubation, is gone. Number 4, discuss statewide standard for equivalency for transfer process, is on the January 18th committee date. Item 5, discuss the requirement of medical director of continuing education programs, is on the committee agenda for the 18th. Discuss the negotiation of continuous state regulatory agreements by DSHS for the purpose of out-of-state clinical affiliations. And number 8 is or is not on the January? It's not. Okay. So we have 3 items that I think will keep us all day. Yes, sir. Steve?
My name is Steve Walker, and I'm with MCC, and I'd like to ask the committee, when we were at Blinn this July, when we were at Blinn in July, I think we made an offer for y'all to come to McLean in January.
Okay.
Or are you planning
You
on
did?
doing it?
You did? You did. Well, when we were at our July meeting at Blinn, Steve and Dr. George both did ask that we come to Waco. And I thank you for reminding me, because we did forget. Is Waco okay? McLennan Community College? I hate to do this. Oscar, yes, no?
I'm looking at the Southwest Airlines.
Okay,
They
Gary?
fly over there.
Gary?
All right.
Okay. Gary? That work for you? John?
C.
Dr. Villers?
Yes. I'm okay.
Jeff?
So now we move to.
Yes.
Nappage, Ms. Villers? Mr. LeMay? Dr. Gonzalez? Kelly? Okay, thank you. See? That's what happens. When we get there, please give us, tonight or the next week, if you'll send me an email, we have a complete address with location, street name, anything, so when it goes in the Texas Register, we'll have those 3 items on the agenda. Any announcements? Thank you all very much for your continued support. Have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any more? Jerry, come on up.
Jerry Densmore with PERCOM. I was here for item number 7 that's been moved to February, and I'm not going to comment on it. I would ask, however, that we identify the online programs versus the traditional programs, because you can't tell on the Texas CMS magazine. For me to be able to prepare for the meeting in February, where I can tell we're discussing quality, and that bothers me. I know that I feel our program's quality, but I can't tell, looking down the list, which of these other schools are online, which ones are traditional. And if we're going to have a real discussion on the quality of online education, we need to delineate out the 2 segments to where we can actually look at the numbers.
Thank you, Jerry. Any other public comment? Now we're adjourned.